You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
I might as well say happy Thursday at this point, because we are so late into Wednesday that the only person that could possibly listen to this on Wednesday is me. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Still technically true. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. We're going to take a break from all the Jim Harbaugh, what have you, as there's nothing that we particularly know at the moment. And we're going to do as promised and do kind of an episode that we've done before once or twice. I think we've done it twice overall, and it's the how did I get here? Because there's certainly, we got the question in the mailbag last week, so I feel like it's a good time to revisit it. And for anyone who hasn't been someone who's followed along. So we'll give you some background here. So I never would have thought in high school that I would be covering sports, let alone Michigan football. If there was any sport that I cared about, it was probably football, but it was the Lions. And it was kind of I did follow along a little bit with Michigan. I more so I watched Michigan when I was young. I stopped watching Michigan once I kind of got into the whole, there's just random things happening on the computer here. I stopped watching Michigan once I became a music person. But I still, I went to a Lions game. I've been to a couple of Lions games, and that was more what I followed along with. Now, in 1998, I do remember going over to my grandparents' house and watching quite a few Michigan games, and that's where I became a Tom Brady fan. You know, I knew who all the quarterbacks and running backs were for Michigan throughout. I knew who Brian Griese was. I didn't watch anything in the 1997 year, but nonetheless, I was more of a Lions fan than anything. Somewhat secretly from all of my other friends. Now I also watched the Red Wings. I was a big Red Wings fan, but generally we were not openly into sports. Our clique. It was not a fashionable thing in the mid to late 90s to do sports and music. You had to pick one. So ultimately, still, I ended up enrolling at the University of Michigan out of Holly High School. I started in 1999. I dutifully went to about half my classes in my first semester. And in 2000, in the winter semester, I not so dutifully probably went to a quarter, if that, of my classes, and thus failed out of Michigan. And didn't really care, just really, was overstressed with the idea of school at that point, especially after I went to private schools, went to Christian schools from preschool through 7th grade and switched to the Holly area schools in 8th grade. And I guess in a lot of ways, I didn't feel challenged by the public school curriculum. So by the time I got to Michigan, it weirdly was just kind of overwhelming, and I just didn't care. Obviously, I was too into music. I wanted my band to get signed, all that kind of stuff. So I dropped out of school, and not too long afterwards, I got a job at Ameritech Cellular, which soon became Singular Wireless. And in that time, in 2000, I think it was the fall of 2000 that I got that job that I started. Might have been 2001. But that was pretty good money for someone who did not have a college degree. So I focused on that. Now, I did have an extracurricular, which is kind of the backbone of what I do now. And that was a friend of mine figured out in high school that if you call record labels and say you want to interview bands for your fanzine, that they would accommodate you. And it was really easy to do. Now, we never put out a fanzine, but I did do my share of writing, and certainly that was the dream at that time, was to start a magazine. And it didn't really work out that way, especially because once I got basically one whole magazine done on my mom's computer. It crashed fatally. None of it was backed up externally. It was the 90s. That wasn't exactly, there were options for that, but all of the writing were more in Aldous PageMaker and all of that. But so the files were pretty big. But nonetheless, that was kind of the start, right, of me thinking that this could be the type of career that I'd want. Now, fast forward 5 years, I finally decided to go back to school. The University of Michigan told me I had to go to community college for a semester or two to prove that I was ready to come back. So I did that, and the university welcomed me back in 2004. And when I came back, I knew I wanted to pursue something artistic. So at first, I thought I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be in theater. I wanted to do that. Now, I had the worst audition probably the theater school has ever seen. And I was taking improv classes, and I met a film student named Phil Ranta who said, no, you want to be a film major. It's more fun over with us anyway. And if you want to act, you can act in your own films and stuff like that. So that was kind of the start of a lot of these things. So I go back in 2004, and that was the beginning of the University of Michigan aspect to everything, really, for me. Because once I went back, I was more serious about watching. At that time, I was watching the NFL. I was watching the NBA. I was all into sports, MLB. That's all I cared about was sports at that point. So I still didn't go to a Michigan game until 2006. By that time, I am fully a film major. I go to the Michigan-Wisconsin game in 2006. It's the Big Ten opener. Michigan wipes the floor with Wisconsin. At that point, my Lions fandom took a hard backseat to Michigan. I became obsessed with Michigan football in a way that I wasn't beforehand, and it kind of went from there. And that obsession never faltered, right? So just to kind of wrap up the intro to how I got to where I'm at, the backstory of my history. I graduated from Michigan in 2008 with a film degree, a very low GPA because I still have that one full semester of zeros across the board, essentially. And probably not zeros, but might as well be. But I moved to California with the intent of being an agent trainee at United Talent Agency. That was what I wanted to do very specifically. Why, I'm not really sure. I read the book Mailroom and decided that being in creative was not what I wanted to do. And I managed to make that happen thanks to Peter Benedek, who was the founder of United Talent Agency, who is a Michigan alum and has a mixer every year at his house in Brentwood. And that was a godsend, in the sense of being able to get into that industry as I wanted to out there. Now, it turns out I did not enjoy it. We'll get to that, and then exactly how I ended up really where I'm at here in just a moment. Before that happens, BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup, we've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those even over at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's continue on with the story of how did I get here. I'm sure most of you want to know not that weird part of the backstory, but probably from this point forward. So I got my start at United Talent Agency on October 27th, 2008. Remember that very clearly. I started the same day as a ardent Buckeye fan, Brian Moore, who I'm still friends with, and we still talk specifically the week of the game. But I had a really nice Michigan community out there in general, and there were a lot of Michigan people that worked at United Talent Agency, from talent agents. Off the top of my head, obviously, Peter Benedek being the founder, and Jennifer Lizitsky at that time, who was there. I don't know if she's still there, but she was a TV agent. I know there's a bunch that I, for some reason, can't think of. There were a lot of others that were in the assistant level. Sam Roston, Haley Waringo. I was there with Kellen Parker, who I don't know if he's still ahead of Comedy Central, but he went to Michigan with me at the same time. We actually worked on a film together. But it was a nice community inside the agency. It was a nice community outside the agency. We would all get together and watch Michigan football. More so the people that I was friends with at school than the people that worked with at UTA. Although Brian Moore, the aforementioned Buckeye fan, and I would get together, especially if there was a, if one school was playing at noon and the other one was playing at 3:30 in Eastern time, we would get together and watch both games, and it was just a great time. And he really helped fuel my love for college football outside of Michigan. Just getting to see other games and things of that nature. Now, I cared about that before, but it really brought it to another level of just take in as much football as you can get. So that is actually pivotal to the how I got here. So I went through the paces at United Talent Agency, went from the mailroom to working on a motion picture talent desk. I started with the one that everyone said was literally the hardest in terms of having to deal with the agent's temperament. He fashioned himself in Ari Gold, and he said he watched Entourage for tips, which should have been a bad sign, but I had that hero complex. I can cure it. Didn't work out that way. I left that desk after about 6-7 months. I went and worked for a lovely, lovely woman, Sarah Victor, for another 6 months or so. She decided she wanted to go work at Paramount as producer. I decided not to follow her, and the timing worked out well for me in the sense that Darren Bogosian came over from CAA, and he was promising to bring all kinds of big talent. Now, the types of people we were working with on Carlos Carreras' desk at first was, I think the biggest name he had was Demian Bashir. He worked with all Hispanic talent, but that we were on the teams for like Jennifer Lopez and some others, Wilmer Valderrama, Jimmy Smits. But it was when, and then Sarah Victor, she really had two clients, Andrew Wilson, the oldest brother of the Wilson brothers, and David Denman. I'm probably violating a heck of a lot of NDAs here. But then Darren Bogosian comes over, and he from CAA, and he's promising to bring all kinds of clients. So we were just, I was really working really diligently for him, especially. It was exciting. I mean, we've got people on the phone that are like the movie stars that I grew up, knowing. So it was really exciting. And it was a really fun job for like the first 6 months of working on his desk. And then somewhere along the line, we both kind of got disillusioned. And then on top of that, got disillusioned with each other. So I decided it was time for me to leave the agency. That really started with Jeffrey Katzenberg from DreamWorks had come and given a talk to the entire agency and talked about how much he loved his job. And I recognized that I was what's his name? Peter from Office Space, Ron Livingston's character. Every day that I came on to the UTA lot was the worst day of my life. So I tried to leave, and then I got pulled back in by Sarah Clossy, who I adore and still talk to. And she had just all kinds of huge clients, and pretty much every client you would know. I decided that I need to stop with the name dropping here for the sake of not being sued. But she and I had a wonderful relationship, working relationship, and I still wanted to get out. And so I demoted myself once back to the mailroom, and it didn't stick. New assistant didn't work out. I had to come back, work the desk for a couple more months, and then demoted myself again. Got a couple months of just literally doing nothing before the agency was like, we can't just keep you here paying you for doing nothing. And so to save face, I decided I was going to start my own talent management company, because I kept on being the runner-up for every job that I interviewed for, because I was decided I didn't want to be in motion picture talent or on that front-facing side. I wanted to be behind the scenes. So I interviewed at places like Bender Spink, who produced The Hangover. I interviewed at Legendary Pictures. I was more looking at comedy, but I got some other interviews, and it just always seemed like I was the runner-up. I'd set myself at a disadvantage from that. So just by being in talent compared to being in the lit side. So I was kind of rudderless, but I had a bunch of clients of my own. They got jobs. It wasn't enough to keep me really afloat. But I mean, some of the people that I represented, and I've done some great things. Neil Gargiulo, I couldn't tell you the names of this project. Sorry, Neil. But I mean, he's been a successful showrunner of the type of content I tend to not watch myself, but he's done some good things. Vanessa Ramos was that was a big one for me, because she's one of the top female TV writers now. She, unfortunately, her last show just got canceled, but she was the showrunner of Blockbuster on Netflix, and some others that have done some things, but those were my main two. So again, still kind of disillusioned, not really feeling what I was doing, not feeling like I had the resources to do what I wanted to do as far as that was concerned. I came home for the holidays in December 2011, and I stayed extra long time. I came back in April of 2012, and I was there for not even a month, because then suddenly my uncle decided he was going to get married, and it was going to happen really fast, so I had to fly back to Michigan, and then I was just like, I'm just going to stay here. And that's when I started working in politics. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but that's how I got my start in photo, because I had bought a DSLR thinking, okay, I'm going to make videos. I'm going to go back to my film roots. I'm going to make videos again. And I was doing some stuff in politics, and I was taking pictures, and they were like, why don't you just take pictures of everything? And before I knew it, I found myself on some like national websites with my pictures and everything like that. So that lasted through 2012, through the campaign, and then they weren't going to hire a photographer. I didn't like the divisiveness that came, just losing friends on the other side of the aisle and all of that stuff, which is not something like I've ever cared about. Right? People are people. I don't really care what you believe. I will still treat you with love and respect regardless. So that was really hard for me to take. I decided that wasn't the route I was going to stay in. Then I went to the Michigan spring game in 2013, bitterly cold. And I think it would have been 2013. Yeah. Absolutely bitterly cold. As soon as we got out of there, I went to Buffalo Wild Wings, and the Masters is on. And I'm like, I decided right then and there I want to golf. It's not something I had ever done. And that led me to taking a bartending and serving job at Bonefish Grill in Novi. And I know that sounds like really a real complete non sequitur, but we're getting somewhere here, I promise you. We're going to continue the how I got here. We'll get to all of the Michigan stuff here in just a moment. All right, so I'm working at a Bonefish Grill. I'm working at a seafood restaurant. If you can imagine having a Michigan degree and how that feels, it doesn't feel great, especially after working in Hollywood. I mean, I went to those parties that had A-listers and stuff like that. You feel really important, but it was a humbling experience that was necessary, I think, because there's no difference in life between being at a seafood restaurant in Novi or being at a talent agency party or whatever in Hollywood. It's just the perception is different, and I think it was a good humbling experience. That said, I was there much longer than I anticipated I would be, but it did light a fire underneath me, especially just because my schedule just was not on the same as anyone that wasn't already in the restaurant industry. So I eventually decided I need to get out of here. I need to find a way to work something that's going to be a little bit more normal. So I started going to the Alumni Association, the Greater Detroit, particularly the M Club of Greater Detroit. that's where I met Rich Hale and Brian Wassman. May Brian rest in peace. He unfortunately passed away very recently. And I also met Shelly Kovacs. And first meeting, I immediately, because the first meeting that I went to was a luncheon. Will Heininger, defensive end, was there, gave a talk. And, was very enthusiastic to meet him. First thing I did, though, as soon as it was done, is I found Rich and Brian, as I knew they were running the meeting, and I showed them the political pictures I had done. And I also, and I failed to mention this, knowing that I wanted to be closer to Michigan football, I started doing these hype videos on Spec, which I just put on YouTube, and they would blow up from there. I feel like, there's a lot of people that do them now, namely Luke DeMello, who is a good friend, and I adore him and his work. But there were some people that were doing some, sometimes when you're on being the kind of big one, I felt like I was taking it to a more of a film trailer type style, which wasn't really being done at that time. And, erasing all the ESPN logos, editing together different shots, the overhead with the replay and the different angles from the replay to make one cohesive shot. So it looked a little bit more like what you see from what the team does now. So I started doing that in 2012. And so when I was at this alumni association meeting in 2014, I showed this to these, as well as the political pictures, to Rich and Brian, and they said, "What are you doing in December?" And this was like August, so it was kind of like, I don't know, what do you want me to do? And they're like, how would you like to photograph the bust for us? Do you think you could do that? And I was like, absolutely. So I found myself at the bust in 2014. And I was in the VIP room to start, because they used to have that behind the scenes at Laurel Manor, and it was all the seniors and their families. And, this was right after Brady Hoke was let go, before they hired Jim Harbaugh. And I was there just kind of taking pictures of whatever I saw, and then posing pictures of Jake Ryan and my favorite player at the time, Devin Gardner. And, it was just a crazy, crazy moment for me. It felt like the best day of my life, right? Because at this point, one of the things I didn't mention was when I lived in LA, I'd gather all my friends that were not Michigan fans, and maybe not even college football fans, and I would have them over to my apartment to watch Michigan football, because I had become the full-fledged fanatic. They lose to Ohio State. Guess what? I'm drinking every beer I can find, and I'm falling asleep by 2 p.m. Pacific time, and I'm not waking up until midnight. That was where I was, right? So, it was everything to me to be in that moment. So now I at least had like a portfolio of me doing some things, because I was the exclusive photographer for the Alumni Association, not just the Greater Detroit for that. So I sent my pictures and stuff to anyone who would see it. And one person got back to me in late March 2015. And that was Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports, Wolverine 24/7. He asked me, "Hey, the spring game is coming up at the end of the week, April 4th, I believe it was. How would you like to shoot it for us?" Yes, please. So took that real seriously. Went and shot the spring game, and Jim Harbaugh's first. Just meeting all these people on the sidelines and stuff, and that, I had been following along with, whether it's a photographer or a writer, and, that just felt really surreal to me. So I, at the end, Steve asked me if I wanted to have, continue taking pictures for the whole season. And I said, I'll be there for anything you need. I want to work in this industry. Whatever you can give me, I will do. So a couple months later, SMSB has their biggest event ever, this giant camp in, Macomb, Michigan. It was at Dakota High School. Every major program in the Big Ten had their coach there. It was Jim Harbaugh, Urban Meyer, Mark D'Antonio, Brian Kelly. It was everybody and their assistants, and it was just a complete, James Franklin, absolutely insane. So from there, and was like hanging out with Steve Lorenz. I met Steve Wiltfong and Barton Simmons, who were both there. And I just pitched myself as best I could. I went telling him that I wanted to write and I wanted to do things. Steve Lorenz was saying he really wanted a writer. So, but he didn't have the power to actually hire someone and pay them the money. That was up to the higher ups. So at that point, I decided that I was going to be a writer. And I would put my camera in with some of the Jim Harbaugh stuff. I went to again another Buffalo Wild Wings, I think in Sterling Heights, with Barton Simmons and Steve Wiltfong and Steve Lorenz, and helped write some things up, I think. And then I did the gallery and got that up, and apparently made an impression on Steve Wiltfong in particular. So fast forward to the 2015 season, I decided I'm going to go to every press conference and I'm going to write. I'm still working at the restaurant. I rearranged my entire schedule to accommodate what Michigan's schedule was. So noon press conference on Monday, 6 p.m. press conference Tuesday night, Wednesday noon press conference, and then the game on Saturday. I rearranged everything so I could be at everything. And I wrote and I did everything every single day that I could. Went to the games, shot the games, took the video, wrote articles, all as an intern. Just doing everything I could to get 24/7 Sports attention outside of the purview of the actual site, the peripheral that I was working for. Steve Lorenz was pushing me to his bosses as much as he could. Steve Wiltfong was doing the same. And then I got a proper audition as a photographer, at least. And I was brought after the season for a week down to San Antonio for the Army All-American Bowl. For that whole week, I was the photographer who took the pictures of every single player that came through there for both for the bowl game as well as the combine. So, I mean, that's how I met people like Najee Harris and DeAndre Swift and all these different guys, Shea Patterson. And I remember I got some intel from the game, and through the help of Steve, would be like, ask Devin Asiasi, because Steve Lorenz wasn't there. He was up back in Michigan. He's like, ask Devin Asiasi this, ask Devin Asiasi that. And I would, and got the answers, and everyone suddenly was like, oh man, he might come to Michigan. Because Michigan at that point in January, no one thought that Devin Asiasi had a chance. So I just kept on grinding and just doing everything that I could, writing articles and all of that. And by this time, CBS had fully taken over ownership of 24/7. They had hired a new boss there, and as far as the person who was kind of overseeing the college sites and what have you, and on the recommendations of Steve Wiltfong and some of those other guys, they created a position for me, and I ended up joining Steve Lorenz. Zach Shaw was hired about a week later. And that was our team. And so that's how I got to where I am. Now, the next part is obviously how did you get locked on? I know that people want to know that. That wasn't much of a story, really. After it was kind of like a crazy couple months after the Scout and 24/7 sites merged, and I was a casualty of that merger. I didn't have to do anything. I got approached by USA Today if I wanted to launch Wolverines Wire. They only had Mountain West Wire, Spartans Wire, Ugo Wire, and then I think that was it. And then maybe a month after that, Wolverines Wire launched, I got approached by David Locke if I wanted to start up Locked On Wolverines, and I waffled for a bit. And they offered it to someone else, and then I said, you know what, I'll do it. And then he was like, well, we got to see what this other person's going to say. And turned out there was a conflict of interest, and they said, if you still want it, it's yours. And I started it in September of 2018. So that is the best way that I could distill down the weird and tangled story of how I got to where I am now. If it wasn't for any of the things that preceded it, if it wasn't for the Lions fandom in high school, if it wasn't for the music, the writing part, if it wasn't for Hollywood, if it wasn't for the working at a seafood restaurant, if it wasn't for politics, none of these things would have happened. So I think it's a pretty incredible, circuitous journey to have gotten here. If you're looking to break into the industry, hard work is undefeated. I think is the main part. Learning just from the people around you. And when I started going to press conferences, I didn't rush to jump in to ask questions. I spent a full 2 years essentially observing what everyone else was doing before I started kind of getting involved. It probably took me longer before I started asking Jim Harbaugh questions on a weekly basis. But I think that's important. Networking is something that I still constantly do. That's something I learned from the Hollywood experience, of course. I am a voracious networker, sometimes to my detriment when it comes to being on the sidelines. But when you see, me tweeting at seemingly randomly tweeting at Molly McGrath with a picture of something, it's because, we've talked about these things. And I think it's important to cultivate relationships. And the other part is something that I learned from Jim Bernstein, who was a professor of mine at Michigan, who's the head of the screenwriting program. And he wrote Renaissance Man, was his big claim to fame. I believe Mighty Ducks 3 and some other movies, but he was talking about the idea of being a comma, or a slash rather, is that in 2007, when I had him, he was pointing out there's no longer necessarily this factional version of jobs in Hollywood, right? It's no longer just director, producer. It's actor, director, producer, director, cinematographer. In the case of a guy like Steven Soderbergh, who he directed and shot my favorite all-time movie, the Ocean's 11 remake, did a lot of things, right? He didn't end up editing that particular one, I don't believe, but he shot it and he directed it, and there's just a lot of things that went into what he was able to do. So I took a lot of that, and that's why you see the kind of multifaceted approach to how I've gone towards everything: photo, video, writing, podcasting. So the other aspect is, don't be afraid to do multiple things, to wear multiple hats, to jump into different areas of expertise. Now you have to learn the things that you might not know, but I had no idea how to podcast. Anyone who's been listening since day one can tell you that I had no idea what I was doing, and I still sometimes don't, but you just do everything you can to the best of the ability that you can and learn from others, and that's how you kind of make things happen. All right, so that's how it all happened. That's what happened. That's how I got here. That's how I'm sitting here in front of you and doing this. So I appreciate you coming along with me on this journey, not just the podcast of discussing it, but just the overall journey. I really do appreciate all of you very much, even those of you who like to yell at me or disagree with me. It's part of the fun. Maybe not the fun for me in the moment, but the fun of sports in general. So thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. We will be back with the mailbag on Thursday proper. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.